The echo of flesh striking flesh rang through the crowded hallway of Magnolia Heights Academy as Preston Caldwell's palm connected with Zara Washington's backside, his laughter mixing with the shocked gasps of onlookers who had no idea they'd just witnessed the beginning of their golden boy's downfall. In exactly 7 seconds, the quiet new girl with the worn backpack and second-hand uniform would transform from prey to predator, revealing a truth that would shatter every assumption about power, privilege, and what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. What Preston and his crew didn't know was that the girl they'd targeted wasn't just any transfer student. She was the granddaughter of Master Jerome Washington, one of the most feared underground fighters in Atlanta's history, trained since age 6, in an art designed not for sport, but for survival. And in those 7 seconds, as Zara's body shifted from victim to warrior, the entire social hierarchy of Magnolia Heights was about to learn why some battles are lost the moment you throw the first strike. The morning air in Savannah carried that distinctive southern weight, thick with humidity and the sweet decay of magnolia blossoms that gave the academy its name. Zara Washington stepped off the city bus at 7:15 m.m. set, her fingers unconsciously tracing the worn edges of her grandfather's dog tags hidden beneath her uniform shirt. 3 weeks. That's all she'd lasted at her previous school before the incident that had her mother packing their belongings in the dead of night, fleeing Atlanta with nothing but what fit in their beat-up Honda Civic. Now here she stood, staring up at the imposing brick facade of Magnolia Heights Academy, where old money sent their children to be polished into the next generation of senators, CEOs, and society darlings. The scholarship that brought her here felt less like an opportunity and more like a sentence, but her mother Camille had been adamant this was their fresh start, their chance to leave the violence behind. If only life were that simple. The main hallway stretched before her like a gauntlet, lined with trophy cases that gleamed with decades of athletic victories and academic achievements. Students moved in carefully choreographed clusters, their designer bags and tailored uniforms marking territories as clearly as any gang colors back in Atlanta. Zara kept her head down, muscle memory from a dozen other first days guiding her toward invisibility. Find your locker. Attend your classes. Avoid eye contact. Survive. She'd made it exactly 43 steps before she felt it, that shift in the air that comes before violence. As familiar to her as breathing, a group of boys lounged against the lockers ahead, their bodies arranged with the casual arrogance of apex predators who'd never known what it felt like to be hunted. At their center stood Preston Caldwell, and even from 20 feet away, Zara could read his whole story in the way he held himself. 6'2", maybe 190, all lean muscle and inherited confidence. His uniform was crisp despite the humidity, his blonde hair styled with the kind of precision that cost more than her mother made in a week. But it was his eyes that told her everything she needed to know, pale blue and utterly empty of consequences. The eyes of someone who'd been taught from birth that the world existed for his amusement. Fresh meat, she heard one of his friends murmur, and the pack shifted, turning toward her with synchronized interest. Zara didn't break stride, didn't acknowledge their attention, just continued her steady progress down the hall. It was always the same dance. Whether in Atlanta's roughest neighborhoods or Savannah's most exclusive zip codes, predators testing boundaries, measuring resistance, calculating risk versus reward. Hey there, Preston's voice cut through the morning chatter, smooth as aged bourbon and twice as intoxicating to those susceptible to its charm. You must be our new scholarship student, Zara, right? She paused, her grandfather's voice echoing in her memory. Never let them choose the battlefield. Baby girl. But sometimes engagement was less dangerous than dismissal. She turned, keeping her body angled, weight balanced, hands loose at her sides. Yes, Preston pushed off from the lockers, his movement fluid and purposeful. His crew spread out behind him, 4 boys who looked like variations on the same theme: wealth, privilege, and the kind of boredom that metastasized into cruelty. Welcome to Magnolia Heights. I'm Preston Caldwell. My family built the science wing. He gestured vaguely toward the east side of the building. Among other things, Zara nodded once, filing the information away. Old money. Deep roots. The kind of family whose name opened doors and closed investigations. Nice to meet you. Is it? Preston stepped closer, and she caught his scent-expensive cologne, failing to mask the sour undertone of last night's beer. "You don't look particularly thrilled. Most girls are a bit more appreciative when I introduce myself." "I'm not most girls." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she saw the flicker of interest in his eyes sharpen into something else. Challenge. Preston Caldwell wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by scholarship students, who should know their place in the carefully maintained ecosystem of Magnolia Heights. "No," he said slowly, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're definitely not as— Tell me, Zara, what brings a girl like you to a place like this?" The emphasis on "like you" wasn't subtle. Nothing about Preston Caldwell was subtle. He was the kind of predator who hunted in broad daylight, secure in the knowledge that his name, his money, his connections would always outweigh any accusations. "Education," Zara replied evenly. "Same as everyone else." One of his friends, a thick-necked boy with the build of a linebacker's, snorted. "Right? Education. That's why they're bussing in kids from the hood now. Diversity quotas." "Chase," Preston said mildly, though his smile widened. "Don't be rude. I'm sure Zara earned her spot here, fair and square." "Didn't you?" "Zara? Some kind of— what was it? Hardship essay? Overcoming adversity?" The hallway had grown quieter, students slowing their pace to watch the show. Zara recognized the dynamic Preston was performing, establishing dominance, reminding everyone of the natural order of things. The new girl needed to be put in her place, and he was just the one to do it. "Something like that," she said, already calculating exits, analyzing stances, noting which of his friends would move first if things escalated. Chase. Definitely. He had that eager energy of someone always trying to prove himself. The others would follow Preston's lead. But Chase would act on his own, trying to impress. "Well," Preston said, circling her slowly, "we're all about helping the less fortunate here at Magnolia Heights. Aren't we, boys?" A chorus of agreement. Laughter, tinged with edges sharp enough to cut. Zara stood perfectly still, letting him complete his circuit, refusing to turn to track his movement. Never show fear. Never show anger. Show nothing they can use. "In fact," Preston continued, now standing directly behind her, "I think it's our duty to make sure you feel welcomed, don't you think?" She felt rather than saw his hand move, had a split second to decide to deflect and reveal her training, or endure and maintain her cover. 3 weeks. She'd lasted 3 weeks at her last school before her instincts overrode her judgment. Before she'd broken Travis Morrison's wrist in 3 places, when he'd cornered her in the empty chemistry lab, before the security footage mysteriously vanished and her word became worthless against his father's legal team, so she chose endurance. Let Preston's palm connect with her backside with a sharp crack that echoed off the marble floors. Let the laughter wash over her like acid rain. Let her body absorb the humiliation, while her mind cataloged every detail, the exact angle of impact, the distribution of his weight, the way he favored his right side. The slight hitch in his shoulder that suggested an old injury, probably rotator cuff. "There," Preston said, satisfaction dripping from his voice as he moved back around to face her. "Consider yourself officially welcome to Magnolia Heights. We take care of our own here. Even the charity cases." Zara met his gaze then, and something in her expression must have penetrated his arrogance because his smile faltered for just a moment. In that instant, she let him see a flicker of what lived beneath her carefully constructed facade. Not the scared scholarship student he'd expected, not the victim he'd tried to create, but something else entirely, something that had been forged in harder fires than he could imagine. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made several students step back unconsciously. "I'll remember this moment." Preston recovered quickly, the smile sliding back into place like a mask. "I certainly hope so. First impressions are important. After all," he turned to his crew, "come on, boys. Let's let our new friend find her way. I'm sure we'll be seeing lots more of each other. Won't we?" "Zara?" They moved off down the hall, their laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Zara remained where she was, counting breaths, controlling the rage that wanted to surge through her limbs and turn Preston Caldwell into a cautionary tale. Around her, the other students began to move again, carefully avoiding eye contact. their whispers following in her wake. She found her locker, input the combination with hands that didn't shake, despite the adrenaline flooding her system, and carefully arranged her few belongings inside. A photo of her mother, working double shifts at the hospital to afford even their subsidized portion of Magnolia Heights tuition. A second photo, older and worn, at the edge of her grandfather in his prime. Standing in a dimly lit ring, his opponent crumpled at his feet. Control is the difference between a fighter and a thug, he'd told her, in blood on his knuckles and wisdom in his eyes. Anyone can throw a punch. It takes a warrior to know when not to. She closed the locker and headed for her first class. American History with Miss Reeves. The classroom was already half full when she entered, conversations dying as she made her way to an empty seat in the middle row. Not too far back to seem disengaged, not too far forward to appear eager. Invisible, unremarkable. Except the damage was already done. Preston had marked her, publicly claimed her as a target, and in the rigid hierarchy of Magnolia Heights, that was as good as painting a bullseye on her back. She could feel it in the way the other students gave her a wide berth, in the curious glances that quickly turned away when she looked up. Rough morning? The voice came from her left. A girl with intricate braids and an expression of careful neutrality occupied the next desk. Everything about her, from her perfectly pressed uniform to her manicured nails, screamed belonging. But there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. I've had worse, Zara replied. I'm sure you have. The girl extended a hand. Imani Rhodes. And before you ask, yes, I'm here on scholarship too. Academic, not hardship. Though, in this place, the distinction hardly matters. Zara shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze. Zara Washington. I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are now. Imani glanced toward the door, where more students were filtering in. Preston doesn't usually move that fast. You must have really impressed him. I have that effect on people. Imani's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. A word of advice? Preston Caldwell isn't just some rich bully you can wait out or avoid. His father owns half the commercial real estate in Savannah. His mother sits on the board of directors for this school. His brother is a state senator. When Preston decides someone doesn't belong here, they usually don't last long. Sounds like you're speaking from experience. Observation? Imani corrected. I've survived 2 years here by being useful enough to keep around, but not threatening enough to eliminate. It's a delicate balance, and one that doesn't include making enemies of people like Preston Caldwell. Miss Reeves entered then, a stern woman in her 50s who commanded instant silence. As she began writing on the board, Zara considered Imani's words. Sound advice. Certainly. The smart play would be to apologize, to grovel, to accept whatever place Preston assigned her in the social order and endure until graduation. But Zara had never been particularly good at playing it smart. The morning passed in a blur of syllabi and seating charts, each teacher going through the same first-day rituals while Zara's mind worked through possibilities. She'd been here before, in different schools with different Prestons, and it always played out the same way. The initial confrontation was just testing, probing for weakness. When she didn't crumble, didn't cry, didn't beg for acceptance, he would escalate. The only question was how quickly and how far he'd be willing to go. She got her answer at lunch. The cafeteria at Magnolia Heights looked more like an upscale restaurant than a school dining hall. Round tables with actual tablecloths, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking manicured gardens, and a menu that included options like pan-seared salmon with quinoa pilaf, alongside more traditional fare. Zara took her tray-subsidized lunch program. Another mark against Herond surveyed the terrain. Preston held court at a large table near the center of the room, his crew arranged around him like knights at a round table. Other tables radiated outward in order of decreasing social importance. With the scholarship students and outcasts pushed to the periphery, it was a map of power drawn in seating arrangements, and everyone knew their place. Zara chose a half-empty table near the windows, sitting with her back to the wall in a clear view of the room. Old habits. She'd barely taken her first bite when a shadow fell across her tray. "You're in my seat." She looked up to find Chase, Preston's thick-necked friend, looming over her. Behind him, she could see Preston watching from his throne, that same empty smile playing at his lips. "I don't see your name on it." Zara said calmly. Chase's face flushed. Move. Now. No. The cafeteria keyed. That ripple effect of drama spreading outward from their table. Zara set down her fork and looked up at Chase. Really looked at him. Saw the steroid acne badly covered by concealer. The way he kept his right hand slightly forward to hide the tremor from whatever upper he'd taken before lunch. The insecurity that radiated from every pore. I said move, Chase repeated, reaching for her tray. Time slowed. Zara's hand moved without conscious thought. Muscle memory taking over. She caught his wrist as it descended, her thumb finding the pressure point that made his fingers spasm open. A slight twist, just enough to send shooting pain up his arm without causing real damage. To anyone watching, it would look like he'd simply thought better of touching her tray. But Chase knew. She saw it in his eyes. The shock and pain and sudden understanding that she wasn't what he'd expected. She released him immediately, picking up her fork as if nothing had happened. Like I said, no. Chase stumbled back, cradling his wrist, his face cycling through confusion and rage. The cafeteria held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. This was the moment where the social order either reasserted itself or shifted to accommodate a new reality. Preston stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. He crossed the cafeteria with unhurried steps, his smile never wavering. When he reached their table, he placed a hand on Chase's shoulder. Chase, buddy, what seems to be the problem? Chase started, then stopped, apparently realizing he couldn't explain what had happened without admitting he'd been bested by a girl half his size. She's being disrespectful, he managed finally. Is she? Preston's gaze moved to Zara, and she saw the calculation there. The reassessment. Well, we can't have that. Can we? Zara, I think you owe my friend an apology. For what? For forgetting your place. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they carried the weight of generations of privilege, of a system designed to keep people like her exactly where people like him thought they belonged. You're new here, so I'll explain how things work. This school has a natural order. Some of us were born to lead, others to follow. And you're here on sufferance. A diversity checkbox. A feel-good story for the school's marketing materials. He leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming in its intensity. So when someone like Chase tells you to move, you move. When someone like me welcomes you to school, you say thank you. And if you're very, very lucky, you might just survive until graduation without learning what happens to people who disturb the natural order of things. The cafeteria was dead silent now. Everyone watching. Everyone waiting. This was the moment of truth. The point where she either bent or broke. Where she accepted her assigned role or refused to play their game. Zara looked up at Preston, then at Chase, still cradling his wrist. Then at the sea of faces surrounding them, some sympathetic, most simply curious, all waiting to see which way the wind would blow. You know what? She said finally, her voice carrying clearly in the silence. You're absolutely right. There is a natural order to things. Preston's smile widened, victory gleaming in his pale eyes. The strong survive. Zara continued, standing slowly, and the weak hide behind daddy's money and grandmother's maiden name. The real fighters earn their place through blood and sweat and sacrifice. While the pretenders strut around in their designer clothes playing at being dangerous because they've never faced a real threat in their lives. She stepped around the table, moving into Preston's space, close enough that he had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. So you're right, there is a natural order, but you've got it backwards, and if you touch me again, if you come near me again, if you so much as breathe in my direction without permission, I'll show you exactly where you really stand in that order. Preston's face had gone pale, then red. Anger, replacing arrogance. Are you threatening me? No. Zara said simply, threats are for people who might not follow through. I'm making you a promise. She turned and walked out of the cafeteria, leaving her tray behind. Leaving the stunned silence and shocked faces, she made it to the bathroom before the shaking started. Adrenaline and rage and the effort of control, all hitting at once. She gripped the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. 3 weeks. She'd lasted 3 weeks at her last school. She had a feeling she wouldn't make it that long here. The video went viral before the final bell rang. Someone had filmed the entire cafeteria confrontation. capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of Preston Caldwell's public humiliation at the hands of the new scholarship student. By 3:30 p.m., it was spreading through Magnolia Heights' social media channels like wildfire, accumulating views and comments with algorithmic efficiency. Zara discovered this while hiding in the library's forgotten corner, a refuge she'd found during fifth period when the whispers and stares had become unbearable. Imani found her there, sliding into the adjacent chair with the kind of careful movements that suggested she was approaching a wild animal. "You've got a death wish," Imani said without preamble, turning her phone to show the video's view count, 47,000 and climbing. Someone tagged Preston's father. Zara closed the book. She hadn't been reading. Good. Maybe he'll teach his son not to assault women in school hallways. You really don't get it, do you? Imani leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. This isn't some public school where kids fight and get suspended for a week. This is Magnolia Heights. When someone like Preston decides you need to disappear, you disappear. Last year, Marcus Chen reported Preston's friend Tyler for dealing Adderall. You know what happened? Marcus's family lost their restaurant's lease. His father's business loans got called in. They had to move back to California. I'm not Marcus Chen. No. You're worse. You're nobody. No connections. No protection. No leverage. Just some girl from Atlanta with a chip on her shoulder, and a scholarship that can be revoked for conduct unbecoming a Magnolia Heights student. Zara studied Imani's face, seeing genuine concern beneath the frustration. Why do you care what happens to me? Because I've been where you are. Maybe not exactly. I never had the guts to stand up to them like that, but I know what it's like to be reminded every day that you don't belong here, that you're only tolerated as long as you stay in your lane. Imani pulled up another video on her phone. Look at this. The footage was grainier. Clearly, from someone's Instagram story, it showed Zara from that morning, the moment of Preston's initial assault, but from a different angle. An angle that clearly showed the calculation in his eyes, the deliberate nature of the harassment. People are talking, Imani continued, not just here, but at other schools. The hashtag number Magnolia Heights Elite is trending locally. Parents are asking questions. The administration is in damage control mode. Good. No. Not good. Cornered animals are dangerous. And you just cornered the apex predator of this entire ecosystem. Imani gathered her things, preparing to leave. They're having an emergency board meeting tonight. Preston's father will be there, along with most of the major donors. Whatever happens next, it won't be subtle. She paused at the end of the aisle. There's a back entrance to the school, through the old gymnasium. Maintenance uses it. But the door code is 1847, the year the school was founded. Just in case you need to leave quickly. After Imani left, Zara remained in her corner, processing the information. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the missed calls from her mother, 7 in the past hour. Camille Washington might work double shifts at Savannah General, but she had her finger on the pulse of every gossip network in the city. There was no way she hadn't heard about the video. Zara typed out a quick message. I'm fine. Staying late to study. Don't wait up. The response was immediate. We'll talk when you get home. Be careful. Be careful. As if careful had ever kept anyone safe. As if following the rules and keeping your head down prevented predators from hunting. Her grandfather had taught her better than that. You can't fight the world. Baby girl, he'd said during one of their early morning training sessions. Her knuckles bloody from the heavy bag. But you can make damn sure the world knows it's been in a fight if it comes for you. The library emptied as evening approached. Students heading home to their gated communities and private tutors. Zara gathered her things slowly, in no hurry to face whatever waited outside. She'd made it through the rest of the day's classes by arriving exactly as the bell rang and leaving the moment it dismissed, giving Preston and his crew no opportunity for confrontation. But she knew that was temporary. Predators didn't give up just because their prey proved difficult. They regrouped, planned, waited for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came at 6:43 p.m. in the empty parking lot behind the old gymnasium. Zara had chosen the back exit deliberately, hoping to avoid the main student lot where Preston's BMW and his crew's vehicles would be waiting lot. The old gym was technically off limits, condemned for renovation that never seemed to happen. But the path behind it led directly to the city bus stop on Oleander Street. She was halfway across the cracked asphalt when she heard the engines 3 cars materialized from different directions, headlights blazing, boxing her in with practiced precision. Preston's BMW, Chase's lifted truck, and a black Mercedes she didn't recognize. They formed a triangle around her, engines running, lights creating a makeshift arena in the gathering dusk. Preston emerged first, and Zara immediately noticed the change. Gone was the polished prep school prince from this morning. His shirt was untucked, sleeves rolled up, and there was something wild in his eyes that spoke of wounded pride and pharmaceutical courage. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice carrying over the rumbling engines. Chase and 3 others followed, spreading out in a semicircle. She recognized Tyler Brennan and Marcus Witt from Preston's usual crew, but the third was older, maybe early 20s, with the kind of build that came from prison yards rather than private gyms. "Just heading home," Zara said, keeping her voice steady while her mind calculated angles, distances, possibilities. 5 opponents, limited space, no witnesses. The math wasn't good. "See? That's the problem," Preston said, moving closer. "You don't seem to understand that this is my home. This school, this city, everything you can see from here to the rivulet all belongs to families like mine. And you're an infection? A disease that needs to be cut out before it spreads." Big words for someone who needed backup, Zara observed, shifting her weight slightly, finding her center. Preston's face twisted. "You think you're tough? Some ghetto girl who knows a few moves?" He pulled something from his pocket brass knuckles. She realized with a cold clarity, "Let me tell you something about the real world. Scholarship. It doesn't matter how tough you are when you're outnumbered and outclassed." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Zara asked, genuinely curious now. "That money makes you strong? That having daddy's lawyers on speed dial makes you a warrior?" "Stop talking," Chase growled, stepping forward, but Preston held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Zara's face. "No, let her talk. Let her get it all out. Because when we're done here, she won't be saying much of anything for a while." The older one, the one she'd tagged as prison muscle, spoke for the first time. "This, the girl from the video? The one who disrespected you? That's her," Tyler confirmed. "Thinks she's special. I don't think I'm special," Zara said, subtly adjusting her stance, preparing for what was coming. "I just think you're weak." That was the trigger. Chase lunged first, exactly as she'd predicted, all rage and no technique, counting on his size advantage to overwhelm her. Zara pivoted, using his momentum against him, her elbow finding his solar plexus with surgical precision. He folded, gasping, but there was no time to capitalize. Tyler came from the left, more cautious but still overconfident. She caught his wrist, twisted, and drove her knee into his ribs. The crack was audible even over the engine noise. He screamed, dropping to one knee. But they kept coming. Marcus grabbed her from behind, arms wrapping around her torso in a bear hug. The prison muscle moved in from the front, fist cocked back. This was the danger of number 7. Perfect technique couldn't overcome simple physics when bodies piled on. Zara snapped her head back, feeling Marcus's nose crunch. His grip loosening just enough, she dropped, slipping out of his hold. But the older one's fist caught her shoulder, spinning her around. Pain bloomed, sharp and immediate. But pain was an old friend. She rolled with the impact, came up running, trying to create space. But Preston was there, the brass knuckles gleaming in the headlights. His first swing was wild, telegraphed. She ducked under it, drove her fist into his kidney. He grunted but didn't drop, the adrenaline and whatever else he was on keeping him upright. "Hold her," he snarled. They converged from all sides. Zara fought with everything her grandfather had taught her. Every dirty trick learned in Atlanta gyms, where rules were suggestions and survival was the only trophy. She broke Chase's finger when he reached for her again, bloodied Tyler's mouth with a perfectly placed palm strike, kept moving, kept fighting. But there were too many. Marcus, blood streaming from his nose, managed to grab her leg as she kicked at Preston. She went down hard, the asphalt tearing through her uniform pants, skinning her knee. They piled on, hands grabbing, pulling, restraining. She thrashed, catching someone in the throat with her elbow, but more hands replaced the ones that fell away. Preston stood over her, breathing hard, his perfect hair now disheveled and wild. Not so tough now, are you? He raised his fist, the brass knuckles catching the light, and Zara had a moment of perfect clarity. This was it, the moment where she found out if all those morning training sessions, all her grandfather's wisdom, all her mother's prayers would be enough. The first hit never came. Instead, there was a sound like thunder, followed by Preston's scream. He flew backward, his body hitting the side of Chase's truck with a metallic thud. The hands holding Zara released as everyone scrambled back, confused and terrified. A figure emerged from the shadows beyond the headlights, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled power that made Preston's earlier posturing look like a child's tantrum. As he stepped into the light, Zara's heart stopped. Jerome Washington was 73 years old, but he moved like a man half that age. His face was weathered, marked by decades of battles, but his eyes were sharp as surgical steel. He wore simple clothes jeans, work boots, a faded Marine Corps jacket, but he carried himself like royalty. "Grandpa?" Zara breathed, struggling to her feet. Jerome didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on Preston, who was trying to crawl away, cradling his ribs where Jerome's first strike had landed. "5 boys," Jerome said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made generals snap to attention. 5 boys to beat on 1 girl? And you think that makes you strong? Who the hell are you? The prison muscle demanded, trying to puff up, despite the fear Zara could smell on him. Jerome turned his attention to the older man, and something in his expression made everyone take another step back. "Son, I've forgotten more about violence than you'll ever learn. You want to know who I am? I'm the reason your boss in Atlanta still walks with a limp." "Yeah, I know who you are. Don't. Kenny Briggs's nephew, right? The one who thinks 3 years in county makes him hard?" Daunt's face went pale. Your Tank Washington was," Jerome corrected. "Now I'm just a grandfather who got a concerning call from his daughter about some boys threatening his grandbaby." He looked at each of them in turn. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in your cars, and you're going to leave. You're going to forget this parking lot exists. You're going to forget my granddaughter exists. Because if you don't," he moved, faster than a man his age had any right to. His hand closed around the hood ornament of Preston's BMW and twisted. The metal shrieked as he tore it free, crumpling the expensive emblem like paper. "If you don't," he continued calmly, "I'll forget that I'm retired. I'll forget that I promised my daughter I'd left that life behind. And trust me, boys, you don't want to meet the man I used to be." They ran, not walked, not retreated with dignity. They ran like their lives depended on it. Car doors slammed. Enginess revved, and within seconds, Zara and her grandfather were alone in the parking lot. The only sound, the distant traffic on Oleander Street. Jerome finally looked at his granddaughter, his stern expression softening. "You hurt?" "I'm fine," Zara said automatically, then winced as the adrenaline began to fade, and the reality of her injuries made themselves known. "How did you—" "Your mother called, said you were in trouble but too stubborn to ask for help. Figured I'd swing by. See if you needed a ride home." He examined her face, noting the bruise already forming on her shoulder, the blood on her knuckles. "Looks like I was just in time. I had it under control." "Sure you did. Baby girl. That's why you were on the ground, with 5 boys standing over you." Zara looked away, shame burning hotter than any of her injuries. "I'm sorry. I know you taught me better. I should have been smarter." "Should have." "Should have what?" Jerome interrupted. "Let that boy put his hands on you without consequence? Let him and his friends terrorize you until you broke or ran?" He shook his head. "You stood your ground. You fought back. You did exactly what I taught you to do. But I lost. You survived?" He corrected. "And you made them work for it? Sometimes that's all the winning you get." He put his arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward his old pickup truck parked in the shadows. "Come on, let's get you home before your mother has a heart attack." As they drove through Savannah's quiet streets, Zara stared out the window, trying to process everything that had happened. In one day, she'd gone from invisible to infamous, from scholarship student to target, from victim to survivor. "They'll be back," she said finally. "Maybe not those specific boys, but others like them. The system protects them. Grandpa, their money, their connections, their fear." Jerome added, "Don't forget that. You saw it tonight. Under all that privilege and posturing, they're terrified of people like us. People who've earned our strength instead of inheriting it. They pulled up outside their small apartment building. The contrast to Magnolia Heights stark in the flickering streetlights and graffiti-tagged walls, but Zara had never been happier to see it. "What do I do now?" she asked. "I can't go back there. Not after this." Jerome turned off the engine and faced her fully. "That's your choice to make. You can run, find another school, start over again. Nothing wrong with tactical retreat when the odds are against you. Or you go back tomorrow with your head high and show them that Zara Washington doesn't break, that she doesn't run, that she stands her ground even when the whole world is trying to push her down." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "But that's a choice only you can make. Baby girl, nobody else can walk your path for you." Zara thought about Preston's face, twisted with entitled rage, about Chase and Tyler and all the others who thought their birthright included the power to terrorize anyone they deemed lesser, about Imani, surviving by making herself small and useful, about all the scholarship kids who'd come before her, driven out by systematic cruelty. "I'm going back," she said quietly. "That's my girl." They climbed the stairs to their apartment in companionable silence, but as Jerome reached for the door, Zara caught his arm. "Grandpa, what you said to Dante about his boss in Atlanta." Jerome's expression darkened. "That's a conversation for another time. Just know that your mother and I didn't leave Atlanta just for her job. Some ghosts are better left buried." Inside, Camille Washington was pacing the small living room, still in her scrubs from the hospital. She took one look at Zara's torn clothes and bruised face and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "My baby," she whispered. "My brave, foolish baby." They spent the next hour cleaning wounds and discussing options. Camille wanted to press charges, to sue the school, to rain down every legal consequence possible on Preston Caldwell and his accomplices. Jerome advocated for a more direct approach, one that involved late-night visits and permanent reminders about respect. Zara listened to both, but her mind was already moving forward, planning for tomorrow. "I need to go back," she said finally, interrupting their debate. "Not to prove anything to them, but to prove something to myself, that I'm not the girl who runs anymore." Camille looked like she wanted to argue, but Jerome placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's not our little girl anymore, Cammy. She's a warrior, and warriors choose their own battles." That night, Zara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her body aching from the fight. Her phone buzzed with message after message. The video of the parking lot fight had already started circulating. Though the quality was poor and the darkness obscured most details, but people knew something had happened. The mighty Preston Caldwell had been seen running from a confrontation, his crew scattered like roaches when the lights came on. A text from an unknown number caught her attention. "This is Imani. Heard about tonight. The whole school's talking. Preston's father is calling emergency meetings. The board is in chaos. Whatever happens tomorrow, you won't be alone. Some of us are tired of being afraid." Zara smiled in the darkness. Maybe she hadn't won the fight in traditional terms. Maybe she'd end up bloodied and bruised on the ground. But she'd stood up, she'd fought back, and in doing so, she'd shown others that it was possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles. The Preston Caldwells of the world didn't give up their power easily, but neither did the Zara Washingtons. And for the first time since arriving in Savannah, she felt ready for whatever came next. The next morning arrived, wrapped in unusual fog, the kind that turned Savannah into something from a ghost story. Zara stood at the bus stop, her uniform carefully pressed to hide the bandages underneath. Her face touched with just enough makeup to soften the bruising. Her mother had wanted to drive her, but Zara had insisted on taking the bus. She needed to walk through those doors on her own terms. The bus was fuller than usual. Students who normally caught rides with parents or drove themselves, apparently curious to see if the girl from the videos would show up. Conversations died as she boarded, replaced by whispers and sideways glances. She found a seat near the middle, neither hiding in the back nor challenging anyone by sitting up front. "You came back?" someone said quietly. She turned to find a boy she didn't recognize. Thin and nervous-looking, with thick glasses and the kind of posture that screamed easy target. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Most people wouldn't. Not after." He stirred vaguely, encompassing everything that had happened. "I'm David Chen, Marcus's cousin, the one who had to move to California." Zara studied him more carefully. You're back? For senior year. My parents thought enough time had passed, that things would be different. He gave a bitter laugh. They weren't here yesterday to see nothing's changed. Things have changed? Zara said firmly. We just have to keep pushing. The bus pulled up to Magnolia Heights, and through the windows, Zara could see the unusual crowd gathered on the front steps. Students, but also adults' parents. Reporters. What looked like school board members. The emergency meeting had apparently spilled over into the morning. As she stepped off the bus, the crowd parted like water. Some faces showed support, others curiosity. A few barely concealed hostility. But no one blocked her path. No one threw anything. No one touched her. She was halfway up the steps when Preston appeared at the top, flanked not by his usual crew but by adults in expensive suits. His father, she realized, noting the same cold eyes, in an older, harder face. Richard Caldwell looked like the kind of man who bought senators and sold companies before breakfast. Miss Washington, the elder Caldwell said, his voice carrying the authority of old money and older cruelty. I believe we need to have a conversation about your future at this institution. No. Zara said simply, continuing up the steps. We don't. She tried to move past them, but Preston stepped into her path, up close. She could see the bruising on his ribs hadn't been hidden as well as her own injuries. The way he stood suggested Jerome's hit had done more damage than just to his pride. You're done here, he hissed. My father's filing charges. Assault. Battery. Conspiracy. Interesting. A new voice interrupted. Because I have video evidence of 5 individuals attacking one student in a premeditated assault. Would you like to discuss criminal charges? Mr. Caldwell? Everyone turned to find Grace Morrison, an elegantly dressed black woman in her 40s, climbing the steps with the confidence of someone who ate corporate lawyers for breakfast. She extended a hand to Zara. Grace Morrison, attorney at law. I believe your mother contacted my firm last night? Zara shook her hand. Recognizing the name, Morrison & Associates was the kind of firm that usually represented Fortune 500 companies, not scholarship students from the wrong side of Savannah. This is a private matter, Richard Caldwell said, his composure cracking slightly. Assault on school property is never private. Grace replied smoothly. Neither is systematic harassment based on race and economic status. Now, we can handle this quietly, with sealed settlements and NDAs, or we can make this extremely public. I have reporters from 3 national outlets on speed dial who would love to hear about the culture of violence and discrimination at one of the South's most prestigious private schools. The crowd had grown, students and parents pressing closer to hear. Someone was live streaming. Multiple someones, actually. Their phones held high to capture every word. You're making a mistake, Richard said quietly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh. But I do. Grace smiled, and it was all teeth. Richard Caldwell. Inherited wealth, built on textile mills that employed children. 3 SEC investigations. 2 settled out of court. Your brother's congressional campaign derailed by assault allegations. Your wife's charity embezzlement scandal, buried by convenient donations. Should I continue? Richard's face had gone pale, then red. Preston looked between his father and the lawyer. Confusion, replacing arrogance. Here's what's going to happen. Grace continued. Your son and his accomplices are going to face appropriate disciplinary action for their assault on my client. The school is going to implement real anti-bullying measures with actual oversight, and if anyone retaliates against Miss Washington or any other scholarship student, I will personally ensure that Magnolia Heights Academy becomes the subject of a federal investigation that will make your previous scandals look like parking tickets. She turned to address the crowd. The days of protecting predators because their parents donate to the library fund are over. The days of driving out students who don't fit your narrow definition of acceptable are over. This school will change, or it will close. Those are your options. The silence was deafening. Then, somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping, slow at first, then joined by another, and another. Not every bunty of faces showed rage and resentment, but enough to matter. Preston made one last attempt, his voice cracking with desperation. You can't do this. This is our school, our legacy. Your legacy is built on the backs of people you stepped on. Zara interrupted. finding her voice at last. And we're not carrying you anymore. She walked past him then, through the doors and into the hallway, where more students waited and watched. Imani was there, standing taller than Zara had ever seen her. David Chen too, and other scholarship kids. Outcasts. The ones who'd learned to make themselves invisible to survive. They weren't invisible anymore. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were hearings, investigations, protests from parents who thought their donations should buy immunity for their children's actions. Preston was expelled, along with Tyler and Marcus. Chase received a suspension and mandatory counseling. The older one, Dante, faced actual criminal charges once his outstanding warrants were discovered. But more importantly, things began to change. The new anti-bullying protocols had teeth, backed by legal oversight, and the threat of Grace Morrison's continued attention. Scholarship students formed a support network, no longer isolated and easy targets. Teachers who had looked the other way found themselves under scrutiny. Zara became something she'd never wanted to be, symbol, a rallying point. But she wore it with the same determination she'd brought to every fight. Because her grandfather had been right, sometimes surviving was its own form of victory. And sometimes, one person standing up was all it took to show others they could stand too. On her last day of senior year, 18 months after that first confrontation in the hallway, Zara stood in the same cafeteria where Preston had tried to assert his dominance. The room was different now, not just in the new anti-bullying posters or the diverse groups sitting together, but in the feeling. The oppressive weight of unspoken hierarchies had lifted, replaced by something lighter. "Frere, you did this?" Imani said, joining her at what had become their regular table. "You changed everything. We did this." Zara corrected, all of us who refused to stay silent anymore, as she looked around the room, seeing faces that would have never dared to meet her eyes before, now smiling and waving. Zara thought about her grandfather's words, about choosing battles and walking paths, and the difference between fighting and being a warrior. She'd learned that difference here, in the most unlikely place, not in the gym where her grandfather had taught her to throw punches, but in these hallways where she'd learned that the hardest fights weren't always physical, that sometimes the greatest victory was simply refusing to be broken. Preston Caldwell had thought he was teaching her about power that morning when he'd put his hands on her. He'd been right, just not in the way he'd intended. He'd taught her that real power wasn't inherited or bought. Real power was earned, one stand at a time.